for the thumbs up. We've got sound, we've got vision, we've got everything. All right, welcome everyone to our second episode of Grazing Horizon. This is AgriProve's Pod series, part podcast, part webinar, all signal, no noise. My name is Matthew Warnkin, founder and chair of AgriProve, and today I'll be your host as we tackle some of the biggest, most consequential questions in Australian agriculture. At Grazing Horizons, we're interested in creating the space to discuss how agriculture sees itself, specifically by looking at farming and grazing through the lens of soil and carbon, not as abstract philosophical concepts, but as practical management tools that can materially improve long-term sustainability, lift productivity, and ultimately drive profitability for producers. We're broadcasting today from the AgriProve soundstage in Albury on Wiradjuri country. I'd like to call out and pay our respects to all First Nations people, recognizing their role as the original innovators in agricultural systems, where by necessity, ecology was integrated into the foundations of the day-to-day economy. Certainly at Grazing Horizons, we will be drawing on that need for that understanding of country and getting those ecological insights for better management to make progress in sustainability, productivity, and profitability. Today, we are back in conversation with Hobbs Magaray, whose life and work sits squarely at that intersection of land, culture, thermodynamic systems thinking, and innovation. Hobbs, seventh generation Texan rancher, musician, prolific social media content creator with a global following, master of ecological adaptive grazing, author, raconteur extraordinaire, and importantly, grazier in residence at AgriProve. In our inaugural episode, Hobbs took us on a journey through the philosophy of the land, how nature sees itself, how cattle fit into that picture, and why the question you ask determines everything that follows. And today we go deeper. We go to the genetic level, genetics deep dive, breeding for resilience. Because here, the problem we haven't solved yet is even if a producer accepts that ecological argument completely, even if they reorganize their grazing management, rethink their relationship with the landscape, could they be running the wrong animal? An animal whose genetics is working against everything the management system is trying to achieve. Hobbs, absolute pleasure to have you back. Welcome to Grazing Horizons. And what have you been up to since our last Pod episode?
So happy to be here, Matthew. Again, it's fantastic. Well, what have I been up to? I've been hanging out with my kids and my wife quite a lot.
How are they enjoying Albury?
Oh, they're loving it. My 8-year-old has started school at St. Patrick's. She's doing great. They're both enjoying boxing classes and gym classes and all.
Well, you need that going to Catholic school.
Yeah, that's exactly. It's a long-standing Irish tradition.
Yeah,
so got to make sure that's done. Well, I've been visiting a lot of farms, a lot of stations around New South Wales and Victoria, seeing what kind of innovative things that farmers and station owners are doing. I almost said ranchers. I'm still trying to break myself out of that, being in Australia. Let's see what they're doing. It's been wonderful. Trying to get fit a little bit, trying to spend some time at the gym. That's been fantastic. And then lately, near and dear to your heart, I know, is that I've been diving into Prigoginian thermodynamics, so we can start towards working at a non-equilibrium thermodynamic framework of regenerative grazing.
Well, we promised this episode that would be more practical as opposed to theoretical. So let's leave the thermodynamics to the after Bodana riff. And maybe start with the practical question in terms of we're talking about genetics and genes. So, and that is the age-old question: do techs and ranchers prefer genes or chaps?
Well, it's the chaps or shaps, as we call them, are I actually prefer chinks. They're a shortened version of shaps, which is short for chincaderos. Chaps is short for chaparreras, which is supposed to protect your genes from the chaparral. So that's the little
good link then. It's just like protection of genes. So that you want to jump into it? We got a lot to get through.
Absolutely.
It was actually a good segue in terms of chaps. It's all about protecting genes. Let me see if I can drive this and bring up the pot and our material, just checking with our producer extraordinaire. Daniel, we good to go? Excellent. All right, Hobbs, take it away.
Oh, yeah, well, I know that everybody wants me to get into the practical, and I promise you there is going to be practical, but you can't understand the practical unless you have a little bit of the why. And if you're going to try to push things in a new direction, you have to have a damn good justification. So what I want to do for the first few slides is to try to establish a why of why we need to think about genetics a little bit differently. And that is inherently thermodynamic, even though I won't get into the weeds of thermodynamics at this point. But let's go to the first slide. And I promise all of the subsequent slides are going to be way better than this one. They're going to be way better. So what we're looking at right here is there's an idea that I want you to take away from this. The idea is that degraded land and really good land does not exist on a gradient. It's not like it gradually gets better. It has events. It's like weightlifting. Speaking of trying to get fit, your muscles don't just slowly get better. You recover and then you hit them with a high energy event, and it reorganizes at a higher state, and then it recovers again, and then you hit it with another energy event. And that's exactly what we're talking about here with grazing. And now the reason we're talking about that with regard to genetics is we have to have an effective tool to be able to deliver that energy event. And that's all that this is. Just imagine that
So grazing is weightlifting for pastures.
That's exactly right. That's precisely the event. And every blue dot is a bifurcation point or a weightlifting session for pastures, and it produces emergent effects.
So as we go through, we want to get a bit more of the Q&A happening. So if you're on this live pod and use the Q&A button on your Teams to start feeding through questions. I'll try and wrangle those to feed them back. But then what you're saying is grazing is weightlifting for pastures, but then it's not just a continuous improvement. There's state changes, there's shifts.
That's exactly right.
All right.
That's right. And the tricky thing that you alluded to in the initial lead up is if you don't have the genetics that can deliver that energetic event without degrading themselves, then you can't have those state changes. Anyway, in other words, you can't improve your land if your cattle can't handle the necessary requirements to improve that land. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so here we have the cosmic rancher. In the background, you see this city rising up out of the ecology. The idea here is that you have to understand what is more fundamental and what's not more fundamental. Human civilization is a derivative of the ecology. It can never be considered prior to the ecology without downstream degradation. The ecology, the life support system of the planet, always has to be primary. It's categorically prior. And that is why I have arranged this building here over on the right called Maintain and Improve the Ecology Proprietary Limited. This is the name of this enterprise. And out at the foundation is ecosystem maintenance and soil health. And you see these double helixes, and that is indicative of the genetics. Because if you don't have the genetics to improve the ecology, to improve the overall state of your landscape, then it doesn't matter how good your grazing management is. You could graze a little bit better, and do less harm, but you're never going to get into that really active state change grazing. And then on top of that, then you can talk about herd productivity, and then you can talk about beef production. And so much in the industrial way of thinking, we consider the beef production primary, and the genetics follow beef production. And that is exactly 100% inverted for the long-term necessity to take care of our life support system.
So turn it upside down.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so that's why I've said for a long time that one way to get your mind in that right spot is to just think of beef production as a waste product. And people don't like that, and I totally understand why they wouldn't. But it's just sort of a mental exercise to think about how much are we venerating the beef product at the expense of the ecosystem. And thermodynamically, mathematically speaking, if you set up the preconditions for an improved ecology, it must deliver more beef. It must deliver better beef. It must deliver healthier beef.
So the way to get the best quality beef is to ignore the beef.
exactly right.
All right, well, let's keep going. I think we should generate some good discussion points just on that one, that one line. All right, next slide.
Fantastic. You can you can summarize every slide in the most controversial way possible. I think that'll be very good. I don't see the next slide going. Is it? Okay, there we go. Okay, so we think about infrastructure in a city or on a farm or anywhere. What does infrastructure do? It facilitates other things. It creates the capacity to accomplish a goal. And we invest billions in roads, dams, power grids. And it enables all the other things. And on a farm, the infrastructure is only as good as the genetics. So if you have a herd that's bred for beef performance before ecological workload, and ecological workload is going to be the key phrase of this whole thing. Breeding for ecological workload is my new refrain.
All right, so maybe on that, what do you mean by ecological workload?
That's the next slide.
Okay.
No worries. So basically the genetic capacity to perform ecological work, and we'll get into a little bit more of a definition here in a second. But yeah, I think that's fair. We can, so just thinking about cattle as infrastructure instead of a production mechanism of a product. And this is, and once again, I am going to get into practically what you can do and how you can do this. But we need to lay the foundation. So let's go into the next slide on ecological workload. And this is one of the few slides where you'll actually see words. The herd's sustained capacity to move plant energy from the sun through an anaerobic rumen into an aerobic soil system, optimizing that transfer through physical impact, chemical transformation, and reproductive continuity under environmental pressure. Now, under environmental pressure is a very important part of that, because modern agriculture exists to remove as much pressure as possible by bringing in external energy supplies. And what we would have in an ideal situation is the herd that can do that on its own. Bison is a great example of this. We were discussing this, I think, last night. They don't require any supplement in the winter, in the brutal winters in the American North, and they leave the bulls in all year round, and they calve within 45 to 60 days. So they have optimized themselves. And now we know cattle are obviously a domestic animal that have been manipulated heavily by humans, but that gives us a target. That gives us something we can push towards. We'll probably never get there because we don't have the benefit at this point of thousands and thousands of generations. But it gives us something that we can make massive progress towards. I think still no questions. If anybody has any questions, just pop in. We'd love to continue to do that. And so that's one of the themes that we're going to continue to talk about here is environmental pressure. Everything that I'm talking about here is under pressure. It's the environment has to push on the cattle so that we can get the cattle that can push back on the environment, so it can affect that state change.
So maybe do a bit more on that. Cattle is infrastructure, and we set up our infrastructure to run a system to get an outcome. So, like, conceptually, how does that change in terms of like the move from then cattle is part of that? Like, it's not the end point, it's actually part of that actual infrastructure. Like, maybe tell me more about conceptually, why is that an important differentiation?
Well, it's a differentiation between infrastructure and product. And so we think of cattle typically as the product, and we set up the infrastructure of our farm to produce that product. Whereas if you look at the entire system as a whole, then you recognize that you get you get more offtake if everything is integrated infrastructure instead of focusing on cattle as the offtake.
Cool. Running on through?
Yes, it looks like we have a question.
All right, let's so you're seeing a question. I'm not seeing questions. Let's just get Daniel to check that I'm on the right tab.
It says, is it possible to improve a herd without spending on outside genetics, even with a small operation. I would say, anecdotally speaking, if you have a small operation, there are really great producers out there who breed cattle under ecological workload, who can improve your genetics very, very quickly. You want to make sure that you're getting those from a producer who's like-minded, as opposed to as opposed to a commercial industrial wholesale. Um, Tom Lassiter founded the Beefmaster herd with 120 animals and closed his herd and produced one of the most magnificent, probably the most functionally efficient herd in the world in the 1970s. So 120 animals is a proof point. I think there have been times where even humanity was near that, and then we bounced back as well. So it's inbreeding if it doesn't work, and it's line breeding if it does.
So another question, if this is so simple from a first principles perspective, why has the traditional model of commercial agriculture, cattle as the product as opposed to infrastructure, been overlooked? What are we missing?
What's been overlooked?
Yeah, why has that traditional model in terms of cattle is the product versus cattle's the infrastructure? Why has this been overlooked?
I think it's the traditional mental framework of humanity. I mean, we are not particularly great at looking at holistic systems as a species. We're really smart, but not smart enough. And so, in a way, it's like we're like the rat in an experimental cage that knows that all they have to do is push the button to get some cocaine. And so they just push the button, they push the button, they push the button, and then they keep getting the result. And we've found that, the ecology is so infinite and energy is so easy to get at up to this point, that we can just add energy and we get a great outcome, and without seeing the slow degradation of that cycle. And so now we're reaching the point where humanity is becoming very aware that it's touching and affecting every single biogeochemical process. And now we're forcing ourselves to go, I think that there might be some negative outcomes, which it all looked, in the 50s, oil was cheap, the aquifers were full, the soil was beautiful. It made perfect sense to just to grow corn and then put all the cattle in a feedlot. It made perfect economic sense because the ecology was an infinite background.
You think that explains, right, like the tension between rising input costs and decreasing profitability?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the number one concern that farmers have, and that's fundamentally why we're doing this. Why I'm talking about this is because it's not working, or it's showing cracks that it indicates that we need to start shoring up the structural foundation of the industry. And so, when we're running out of answers, we have to start asking different questions, and we have to start pressure testing our deepest assumptions. And one of our deepest assumptions that we don't pressure test that very much is, what's this all for? Is it to produce beef? Well, that's what we've been doing, and it's creating a negative feedback loop of higher input costs and lower profitability.
On that profitability front, like if you change genetics and there's no market, how do you stay viable?
Well, there are a couple of things. The biggest one is, you don't want to just completely change genetics. This is why I love Mashona cattle so much. Actually, they're the African Angus. They're black and polled, and they're basically as fungible they're as tradable for Angus as you can get, but they're much better. You obviously there's the real solutions are going to be at the commodity level, and if you graze properly in the way that I promote and that I teach, you generally end up with a 2x increase in stocking rate. And I'm willing to spend less money on inputs, have twice as many calves, and get dinged at the market a little bit at the commodity level, because my profitability per hectare is higher.
So not just the revenue line, you look at the net overall line in terms of take those costs.
Yeah, absolutely. We can go to the next slide. This is something we're going to talk about a little bit as we go through. It's the difference. It's what stability really is, and what is primary is the ecological system. We live on an ecological life support system. And nature built genetics for stability over time. It's in thermodynamics what they call a wide basin of attraction, which basically just means ability to tolerate a lot of stress. And so we have generated, over time, nature created animals that can tolerate a huge amount of stress and still be fertile and still be reproductive. Now, over the last 70 years, particularly as we've been selecting cattle for the metrics, we've been really accomplishing these metrics. We've been doing a great job of getting what we wanted. But the downside is, as we've been subsidizing it with our landscape health, and it shows in our profitability first and foremost. Now, we didn't do it because it didn't work, and there were smart, amazing people whose hearts were in the right place, were trying to do great by their family, by their community, by their country, and these were all decisions that were made by people thinking they were doing the right thing. And I'm not castigating or talking ill of any of the people who are the most amazing people who created industrial agriculture. It's just a stepping stone to where we are now, and it's our responsibility to continue questioning and continue growing and continue improving. So it's our responsibility to be identifying anything that's suboptimal and trying to improve it. So no hate, not throwing any shade, just trying to be as clear-eyed and analytical as I possibly can. We can go to the next slide.
Yep, I think we're there.
Yeah, we have some questions.
Okay, well spotted.
What were the personal motivations / revelations / teachings that led you to consider this genetics-led approach to your herd management? First and foremost, Johann Zeetzman, The Man, Cattle, and Veld. That's first and foremost. That's as an express teaching source. I recommend everybody read that book.
The name of the book again is
Man, Cattle, and Veld, or Felt, depending on how you pronounce it. It's VELD. It's an Afrikaans word for field.
If you've got Spotify, it is available. I listen to it. It's very useful.
Yeah, Johann Zeetzman is an incredible first principles systems thinker, and that's the first and foremost situation. I want to actually go back to the change genetics and there's no market. How do you stay viable question? I just want to talk about that a little bit. What's the alternative? The alternative is we continue on the path that we're going on right now. It's a hard choice, and you have to be creative to figure out a market. But right now, farmers are stuck on this seesaw of low profitability, particularly in the tougher, more low forage quality areas. The vast majority of beef cattle on the planet are grown in subtropical and tropical areas, and that's where we have the least adapted genetics. And so, we need people who are willing to be leaders. We need people who are willing to take a chance to say what we've been doing hasn't been working. And we got to figure out a way around this, and we got to find a way to tell the story in a way that industry is going to support it, and that industry is going to say this is the right thing to do.
And alternative sources of income.
Yes, that's right.
Like getting paid for actually improving your overall ecology.
That's right.
So let's not leave carbon credits out of how that can actually pivot and be that funding source for innovation.
We got that on the last slide.
All right.
Alternative revenue streams, baby. Yeah, okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, so I'll try to make this as quick as possible, and so we can get into the practical, but we have to be really careful about selecting for individual traits. You go to a stud bull sale, and it looks like it's all these individual traits laid out, and people are getting the traits that they want. The calving ease is better. The growth index is great. The ribeye marbling is wonderful. And then you think you're on this fast coasting road to the Emerald City of profitability and maximum efficiency. But what we end up with is declining fertility. We end up with more supplement use, and we end up with inputs. And there are a lot of people out there who are going to go, well, my fertility is fine. And then I would ask, are they doing ecological workload? Are you putting these animals under pressure, or are we importing energy to subsidize that fertility? I'm not pointing any fingers. I'm just asking the question.
So what about then the response that that's actually just good management, like in terms of supplements into to drive that? And then coming back to maybe then just a question of peering on a personal level, like what did you see when you started changing your grazing practices? What was that viability, profitability, revenue aspect?
Well, immediately when I started using the style of grazing that we're going to talk about in the next podcast, my uh, my profitability increased. But the biggest thing that I saw right away was that I doubled my stocking rate immediately. I was running. I'll give you a great example. The first year that I was grazing in Southeast Texas, low forage quality environment, high rainfall, high parasite load, just really, really tough conditions. I thought, oh my gosh, there's so much grass here. It's going to be easy grazing. It was exactly the opposite. I thought it was much more difficult than in the high deserts of the Pacific Northwest. And in the first summer, halfway through the summer, it was like the worst drought they'd had in 50 years. The trucks and trailers were lined up for a kilometer outside of all the auction houses to sell to get people getting rid of their cattle. And I still had I was at double the county average stocking rate, and I was still had half of my forage left on my place when it started to rain finally. So just it's because I was grazing for ecological workload. Now, what I will say is that I could have done it a lot better. I could have been a lot easier on the cattle and not pressured them as much while waiting for the genetics to catch up for the ability to do that ecological workload. And that is why we're putting genetics first before grazing style, because you have to have a tool that can handle the job. And you can start to select for ecologically adapted genetics before or as you slowly improve your grazing style, which really works because it usually takes a slow increase in infrastructure and in how you view your property to be able to actually do that. So they work hand in hand. But it's important to start with the genetics because it's you only get one chance to do it every year. It's an annual cycle, so you got to start now.
Next slide.
Next slide.
All right.
Let's do it. Okay, and this is where it gets a little bit this is a little academic, but you're gonna love this. This is so important. You're gonna see this everywhere in your life. This is Charles Goodhart, and he worked for the Bank of England in the 70s, and Margaret Thatcher was like, we got to get inflation down. We got to get inflation down. And all the people in the Bank of England said, okay, well, the monetary supply is the number one predictor of inflation. If we control the monetary supply, it will control inflation. So they started doing everything to manage monetary supply. And all that meant was they created new financial instruments and they moved a bunch of stuff off their books, and inflation did what it wanted anyway. And just as a sort of an offhand comment, he said, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And we see this everywhere. Like for instance, in the hospital, and this is a great example. In the United States, they wanted to have really good surgical outcomes, right? So the easiest way to do that is you deny the high risk surgeries. Like let's just pad those numbers.
Let's not take on the workload.
That's right. That's exactly right. Graduation rate, we need more people to graduate. Let's lower the standards. So what we're actually trying to accomplish gets totally lost by trying to meet the metric. In 2007, right before the great crash, the only thing that mattered was getting that AAA rating. Didn't matter, what was in there. Didn't matter that the product was good. You just got that AAA rating, and then the economy crashed. Showing good earnings, good metrics for your corporation. Well, let's just buy back our own shares, and it looks profitable. It looks great, but it's actually it's not. These are great examples of just managing for the metric instead of managing for the fundamental outcome. And in this case, the fundamental outcome is we need to have a really well functioning life support system to continue life on planet Earth. And an even more modern example is AI, right? There are lots of examples of how you'll tell AI fix all the bugs in this code, and AI will go, oh well, the easiest way to fix all the bugs is to delete the whole code.
So, but then let's test that a bit in terms of when it comes to cow breeding, because on the genetic front, good question coming in. Genetic front, we have some of the best fertility breed plan traits in the world that we can push for fertility, including days to calving, scrotal size, and mature cow weight. Would you agree that there are benefits of pushing for those traits in a herd?
Well, yes, if you're selecting for fertility, what we'll get into in a moment is actually what is the node in the system that we can select for. Once we identify the node, then we can identify how to select for that. And it turns out fertility is the node for selecting for ecological workload. And so yes, absolutely, some of those traits are very, very important, very important.
And maybe just coming back to a comment before and another question. But is one of them the outcomes of implementing this properly is increased carrying capacity?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let's push it a bit harder. Is there any way that you can do this without increasing carrying capacity?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you can, but you won't be pushing the ecological workload. You won't be pushing the cattle as much. I mean, the biggest input is selective grazing. That is the biggest input on in the farming industry. The ranching industry is selective grazing. You know, allowing the cattle to eat whatever they want instead of enforcing that high energy event in non-selective grazing, which we'll get into in the next podcast. But and that's what really is going to separate the adapted cattle from the ones that are not. So yes, Adam Gunthorpe, great question.
Next slide.
Yeah. And these are just some examples of Goodhart's law with regard to agriculture and the fishery. You know, in 1991, the sustainable target metric was being met by the cod industry in the North Atlantic. In 1992, the entire fishery collapsed because they were just measuring for the haul. They weren't measuring for the population dynamics, how many young, how many old. They were just measuring kilograms. The bulldog, great example. They can't breathe and they need help. They need help having babies. So it's like we're totally missing the point of having of an animal. And if that's what you want, that that's fine. But these are just examples of when we try to hit a metric, we have lots of unfortunate outcomes. Then we can go to the next one, and you'll see fertility is the lever in the middle. So I know by now some people are going to be thinking, surely the answer here is balance, right? If we take a balanced approach with ecology on one side, market demands on the other, we can find that middle ground, make everybody happy. And that totally sounds wise. That sounds like what a wise person in the room would say. We have to be balanced. We have to take a balanced approach. But I want to explore why that might be wrong. Why I think it is wrong. Because I mean, if you look at this rancher here, you look at anybody on a balance beam, you have to expend tremendous energy to stay balanced. It's not like you're just standing still. It's not like you're standing on the ground. And balance assumes that everything being balanced is an equally valid input to the system. They are not equal. Ecology is the independent variable. We have to understand this. It is categorically prior. Market demands are a constraint to be satisfied as a derivative of the independent variable, as a derivative of the ecological framework. It is not an equal partner in a negotiation. We think that the beef outcome and the sustainability are equal partners in this negotiation, and that is fundamentally, objectively, provably wrong. And that's one of the assumptions that most people don't even think about. And the moment you treat them as an equal, you have elevated a dependent variable to the status of an independent one. That is Goodhart's law in this case. So what I'm not after is not balance. I'm after stability. And what stability is looks like a fertile herd under ecological workload. One of the questions earlier was from Adam Gunthorpe, who has, I think, an extremely functionally efficient herd. And I think in the fourth podcast, we're going to be doing Who's Doing It Right. And Adam, if you're all right, I think we're probably going to talk about you a little bit in that podcast. And so basically, always I would say be skeptical when people say, oh, you have to have balance. It's like, no, you don't want balance, you want stability. Sometimes you have to walk a balance beam to get to stability, but stability should always be the target.
Cool. So in the interest of not having balance, Why don't we go to a word from our sponsor, AgriProve, Grazing Horizons, brought to you by AgriProve. And at AgriProve, we are in the business of making your soil carbon bankable with carbon credits delivered by better management. Now, every farmer knows the horizon. It's where you read the weather, judge the season, and picture what your land could become. But for too long, what's beneath your feet has been invisible. Soil carbon changing with every season, responding to every decision you make, yet impossible to see until years later when the next soil test finally comes back. So with Horizon by AgriProve, all of that changes. And Horizon is our breakthrough soil intelligence platform that combines satellite imagery, machine learning, and now over 30,000 soil samples to give you monthly insights into exactly how your soil is performing across every single paddock. And here's the part that really matters. When your carbon grows, you will get credited annually. We're bringing this online now. Real revenue, ability to reinvest back into your land, your passes, and your future. And it's a call out to the Australian government because this is built on a $12 million R&D project made possible with support from the National Soil Carbon Innovation Challenge. We deliver regulatory grade verification accuracy aligned with the Australian carbon credit scheme designed to scale across even the largest pastoral holdings. Productivity, profitability, sustainability, all from the soil up. So if you would like to get paid for improving your land management, reach out to the team at AgriProve to set up an initial assessment with Horizon on our award-winning soil intelligence platform. And thank you, AgriProve. Cool. So, Hobbs.
There's a new question, unless you had a question.
Nope. Go to that new question.
It's a great question. Should the outcome of focus under this style of management be increase of kilograms per hectare of land accrued, live weight, instead of kilograms per animal? I would say, what is the thing we could focus on that would make kilograms per hectare of land increase on its own? And if we manage in a way that focuses on, and this is a Zeitzman observation, if we focus on maximizing sustainable profit per hectare, then we will end up with maximal kilograms per hectare as well. So it's, I mean, this is, you're exactly right. You're asking exactly the right question. You put your finger on it, which is kilograms per animal was a winning strategy when land was infinite and everybody knew that you could only carry a certain amount of cattle on a given piece of land because it was a massive pain in the ass to build any fence. And so the system was managed in a way that was, by today's standards, not managed at all. And so you couldn't manage on a pixel basis, so you couldn't increase your carrying capacity. So the only thing that made sense to do was to try to get more, to squeeze more out of every animal. Made perfect sense. But now that we can manage on a pixel basis, we can manage more intensively and keep our data a lot better. Makes way more sense to be aiming for that sustainable profit per hectare. And what that means in practice is breeding cattle that require fewer inputs, breeding cattle that can harvest more of the forage and are willing, because they're nutritionally adapted, to take more stem, to take more of the undesirable plants. Then we'll get into that in the next podcast. But what I'm encouraging you to do is to think about this in a way that if you start with the ecology, then everything else blooms on its own. A healthy, if you're trying to improve your soil, that means more grass. If you have more grass, you can run more cattle. If you can run more cattle at a higher efficiency and they're genetically adapted, even if they're smaller, the weaning weights are lower, you must end up mathematically, thermodynamically, with more kilograms of beef produced per hectare.
All right, let's get back into next slide.
Let's skip a couple of slides and get to herd fertility is the proxy.
All right.
So the herd fertility you can think about in two ways: as an individual and as a proxy for the functionality of the herd's ability to do ecological workload. The reproductive system in a cow is not an isolated organ. It's not just the uterus. Everybody knows this. It is the end point of an integrated biological cascade. This is the thing. Everything is a biological cascade. it doesn't stop and start at the cow's skin. It doesn't stop and start at the soil level. Everything is a biological cascade, and it's how we organize that cascade that produces the results. Fertility is not just one thing, it's an integrated outcome of everything that matters ecologically and economically. And it can only be expressed and understood if they are under ecological pressure. If you're not under pressure and you can have a baby, big deal. But if you are under pressure and you can have a baby, that is in fact a big deal. Here's a great example. My godfather, in a few years ago, they started having wolf problems up in the Oregon high desert, and his first calf heifer pregnancy rate came back much lower than he wanted it to. It's usually something in the 80s, and this time it was in the 60s. And he thinks that they were stressed because of the wolves. And I said, well, you found your most fertile heifers. And he's like, oh no, that's not really what fertility is about. And I was thinking, that's exactly what fertility is about, because they're under real world pressure. The most fertile under they were being pressured by the ecology. So the ones that had academic fertility is not the same as real world fertility.
So we're kind of like talking about the grazing equivalent of when the tide goes out and seeing who's swimming with no costume on.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. If you can have a baby in a refugee camp, is a totally different thing than having a baby in a Manhattan penthouse.
And the equivalent for grazing is that's the true test in terms of your underlying sustainability of your infrastructure, is that ability to persist in all conditions.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So let's go to the next one. Oh yeah, I love this one. The idea here is, and yes, you're exactly right. We were talking about earlier that fertility is the sun that we are orbiting around in this, because as I said, it's the convergence point. Now, if you imagine fertility as the sun and you have all of these planets around it, imagine you have all these planets in orbit around, and they're in a stable orbit. Everything's really stable, and you go, I think I want to warm up the atmosphere on one of these planets a little bit, and you just push it a tiny bit closer to the sun. You're just tweaking a little thing. Well, what happens? It throws out the orbit of every single it throws off the orbit of every single planet that's in that system. And what happens is it doesn't look like much changes at first, but over time, and suddenly you get this cascade of destruction. And so you have to be really careful. Everything every planet is in a stable stable orbit as a result of a lot of stuff smashing into each other. Okay, it takes a lot of things smashing into each other to create a stable orbit. So we want to create as much stability as possible without creating as much damage as possible. And we do that by selecting for fertility. So let's go to the next one. And this one is just we just have to understand that what makes in the industrial system, what makes people money is the opposite of what is resilient. So just a short background. In the 50s, in the 50s and around that decade, we stopped using tallow as a cooking material. We started using seed oils. So suddenly all of that excess fat that the cattle were producing, there was no demand for it as much. And also, these easy fleshing, short, fat cows that were going into the feedlots because it was more economical to put them in the feedlots, they just put on a bunch of extra fat that they couldn't sell because we were using seed oil. So they started selecting cattle for growth rates. And what that means is the cattle are partitioning energy for lean growth instead of fat. And fat is your thermodynamic surplus. Fat is your drought reserve that's internal. Fat is the thing that allows you to swim to make sure you have the trunks on when the tide goes out. So we've had for a long time these cattle who the steers are just doing beautifully in a feedlot. They're profitable. They're growing well, and then their sisters are subfertile and require a lot of inputs, particularly selective grazing, to stay fertile. So what we want is that stability of the genetics, ones that they put on fat easily. They're genetically tuned to partition energy into fat.
So new market innovation required is a market for fat to start to get rewarded for a fertility program that builds on that the system that concentrates that energy into your living infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. And beef tallow is definitely making a comeback. People are using it for face creams. They're cooking with it more because RFK is a big proponent of beef tallow.
Cool. Let's not get too political. We've traversed enough country already. We pushing through. Next slide.
Yeah, let's next slide. Okay. And this is the one. This is your favorite slide.
Yeah, let's get some carbon credits.
That's right.
Race credits.
So cattle genetics unlock revenue streams. If you're breeding for beef carcass outcomes and only beef carcass outcomes, you're going to have a much harder time accessing all of this stuff, because your ability to access these additional revenue streams are a derivative of your cattle's ability to perform ecological work. I mean, the savanna credits are a great example. The goal is to burn less, and so you have more dead standing grass on the ground. Because if you accomplish your goal of having of burning less, that means that there's more dry standing feed, which is much harder for a cow to stay in good condition on than fresh green pick as a result of a burn. So in order to preserve the permanence of that, and to prevent a catastrophic downstream fire because of all the standing forage, you want a cow that is genetically adapted to handle that. And if you have the cattle that can do the ecological workload to push the system to that higher ordered state, then you get increases in biodiversity. You get increases in soil carbon, and none of these require you to take your property out of production. They're
enhancing production.
You're enhancing your production, enhancing your bottom line, and reef credits as well that are beginning to come online. You'll be able to speak to this much better than I will, Matthew. But it's if your soil carbon increases, your biodiversity increases, you're going to be hanging on to a lot more water, and stuff is not going to be running off, and then the South Australian fisheries are not going to be suffering as much because of our great genetic and grazing decisions.
That's something we could can't come back to in the future. It's an important point in terms of managing everything holistic and getting those metrics, but finding an incentive to be rewarded for holding on to more water and having less runoff, because it's there's nutrients in that runoff as well. Let's keep on keeping on.
All right, so now the practical. Oh no, we're missing a slide, the most important slide.
No.
Yeah. Damn. Can you put that in there real quick, Daniel? If I slip it over to you.
Let's see, it's in
I think I uploaded it and I had some connectivity problem. So let me just find this real quick.
So
but I'll just talk about it for a second.
Maybe if anyone's got any good ideas on market for tallow, so drive that market for tallow. And as part of that market development, in terms of more markets, is greater diversity for the commercial operations. And the thing that keeps coming back in my mind, Hobbs, is that comment in terms of the cattle is not the product, the cattle is the infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And the long-term sustainability of farms has been thought about pretty much about the land, and people get the idea of investing into infrastructure for that long-term benefit that you get to improve production. I think that's going to be some interesting conceptual shifts as you drive to investing in your cattle as infrastructure. It's going to be super challenging. So if we got that slide, we're still waiting on it.
Just a second. Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, a cow, to some sense, is a tree on a different time scale.
Cow is a tree on a different time scale.
It's performing ecological work.
So we need to celebrate more in terms of what cattle and beef do, because they get a bad rap. You look at time and time again, cattle are seen as the problem. They're just saying, well, no, and in fact, let's push that even a bit further. People are saying like planting trees is the answer, but you're saying, well, actually, here's a time scale for a herd of mobile trees that are equally important, perhaps even more important in terms of your ecological infrastructure on the farm.
Yeah, trees are cycling nutrients. They're cycling water. If we didn't have trees, rainfall wouldn't make it more than 100 miles inland because the trees are constantly taking that water out of the soil and shooting it back up into the ground. So they're holding it and cycling it and making it possible for cattle are the same thing. They're the original irrigation mechanism. If you imagine a herd of 10,000 bison drinking at a river and then peeing 15 to 20 times a day as they proceed to the next water point, that's a lot of irrigation. And every place that a cow pees is, I believe, it's a 1,500. It's no, I'm sorry, yeah, 1,500 mils. No, what is it? 150 mils. It's 150 mils of rain every place that a cow pees, plus nitrogen fertilizer.
Yeah.
Did we get it?
We got it. Now let's share the screen.
Fantastic. Thank you for patience, everybody, as we get to the actual practical part.
This is the one.
That's
This is the one I like to, where we get to talk about sheath tightness.
yeah, well, I think I had a note. Matthew's favorite metric.
Tightness of sheath.
Well, the most important thing we focus on, if the first thing you should do is identify fertility in your herd. If you're in a high forage quality environment like the Australian Alps, Tasmania, somewhere in Victoria, you're not going to have a problem really with fertility. You may, when you start pushing them under ecological workload, you start grazing at higher densities and asking them to have a higher harvest efficiency, then you will see some percentage of fall off. The degree that you want is going to be based on how you choose to make that transition and you graze. But up into Queensland, lower forage quality, you're going to have a percentage of animals that don't calve at 2 years old. So the fundamental thing is you want a calf that conceives at 12 to 15 months, calves at 2, and then calves at 3. That is the number one sign of fertility. That's success in the ecology. That is the ecology screaming out to you that yes, thermodynamically intact, great cow performing its ecological workload. And what that means practically and here is the heresy: select your own bulls, breed your own bulls. Don't rely on the trait chasing stud bull game. I'm a huge and unashamed advocate for selecting your own bulls. It makes perfect sense if you're going for carcass data to get bulls that have great ribeye, fat cover, ultrasound metrics. It makes perfect sense, but we're losing sight of what the actual game is here. The actual game is maximum sustainable profit per hectare and increasing the ecological functionality of your land. That is the most important part. Select bulls out of your most fertile cows.
Do fertile cows taste better?
I would be willing to bet they are. They would be in possession of a superior energy processing mechanism, which definitionally would have a more and then I would have to guess that the human biome has evolved to get more energy out of and appreciate and seek out the better crafted energy sources.
That'd be a great blind test in terms of different types of beef tracked back to their fertility scores.
Yeah, absolutely. So and then there, I would really recommend you look into the Seedsman's work on selection. Jaime Elizondo, also known as Jim Elizondo, has done some great work on this as well. They're really fantastic selectors of bulls and cows. And the thing is, you can't select a fertile cow. She has to reveal herself. You will see after they've revealed themselves certain characteristics and certain traits. The bull on the left is RR17, bred in Florida, lives in Arkansas now. You can actually get semen from that bull. here in Australia. The cow on the right is one of 4 registered Brahman cows on the African continent that calved at 2 and 3 years old. Out of all of the registered cows, Brahman cows on the African continent, there were only 4 that calved at 2 and 3. Now I know there are more than in Australia, but the Brahman breed in low forage quality environments has a lot of improvement to go, and there are people doing great work. Adam Gunthorpe is a great example of that. He has some really fantastic genetics, early maturing, capable of doing that ecological workload. So that's, practically speaking. Let's look at the bull. You want bulls that are heavy for their height. That's what Eastman calls the 8 and 5 package. Just a ton of material shoved, 8 kilograms shoved in a 5 kilogram sack. You want them super masculine. That's not just looks. That's hormonal balance. And then obviously tight sheath. You want a good tight sheath.
Stability.
That's right.
It's what they're there for. It's what they're trying to do. Some of those metrics in terms of as we move from kilograms per beast to kilograms per hectare,
And sustainable profitability per hectare.
and yeah, profitability per hectare, and then the infrastructure it is that convergence in terms of cattle and their role of converting forage to profitable outcome, and then maybe just talk a bit about if you're using forage for maintenance of just the cow in terms of freeloaders within the herd. How do you identify them? How do you make sure that any cow in your herd is actually contributing ecological workload and to those profitability metrics?
Well, ecological workload is the capacity to self-regenerate. So if you are not self-replicating, if you are not self-replicating, that's an energy leak, and that energy leak is lost profitability. So if you have a very fertile herd that is replicating well under ecological workload, under environmental pressure, then you will have a high calving rate, which is key to the profitability. So freeloaders are by definition low on ecological workload capability.
So Hobbs, as we hit to wrapping up, if you could provide one bit of advice to change one specific practical thing in terms of how Australian producers make genetic decisions, and that's going to be a change from tomorrow morning, what would that be?
Select your own bulls.
Select your own bulls.
Yeah, homegrown bulls.
Any final thoughts before we call it a wrap?
I think we covered a lot of ground, Matthew.
I'm fascinated to think of at some point in terms of that fertility, like when do we get thermodynamics as part of your application for finance with the bank in terms of here is my underlying, this is why I'm going to be profitable. It's the second law of thermodynamics.
Well, yeah, the thermodynamics as a profitability as a proxy for thermodynamic efficiency.
And I think there's some great stuff that we should dive into more in terms of, well, what are these emerging ecological markets like carbon credits? How does that translate to the long-term sustainability of your whole infrastructure asset, including those movable pieces like your cattle herd? And then how does that track to profitability so we can actually start to fill in those pieces in terms of actual tangible metrics? So thank you, everyone. At AgriProve, we believe soil is the operating system of agriculture. Carbon is its emerging currency. Conversations like this do help us move beyond data to better understand the stories, the systems, the decisions that lie beneath our feet. The ones that ultimately determine our collective sustainability, our collective productivity, and importantly, profitability. This has been Grazing Horizons and AgriProve Podinam. If you would like to get paid for increasing your natural capital, talk to the friendly team at AgriProve, where our state-of-the-art soil intelligence platform will help you see your soil like never before. You've been listening to Hobbs Magaray on his philosophy of grazing as applied to genetic selection. My name is Matthew Warnken, and Horizon is only the beginning. Thank you.